In this video, I'm gonna be giving you a complete guide on every single sword in Blox Fruits. And starting off first, we got the katana. And this is a very basic and beginner sword in the game. It costs a total of 1,000 belly, and you can buy directly from the sword dealer. He's located right next to your spawn when you first join the game. This sword does have a grade 2, which you can upgrade to for 5 leather straps and 5 angel wings, which increases the sword's damage by a whopping 30%. This sword has 2 abilities. The first one is called Quiet Rush, and for this one, you dash forward, dealing a decent amount of damage to every enemy in your path. The next ability is called Air Slash. This is the X ability with a 20 mastery requirement. For this one, you just shoot out an air slash. Pretty self-explanatory. Overall, it's a pretty solid sword, but it is the worst sword in the game. Anyways, moving on, we got the cutlass, and this is very similar to the katana. I'm pretty sure it's just a reskin of it. It literally has the exact same abilities and cost, and you can buy it from the exact same NPC. Moving on, we got the dual katanas. These cost 12,000 belly to buy, and you can buy it from the sword dealer of the West, who is located at the pirate village on the first sea. You can upgrade this sword to grade 2 for 12 angel wings and 10 leather straps, and increases the sword's damage by 30%. The first ability of this sword is called Whirlwind. For this one, you shoot out a moving slash that deals a decent amount of damage to your enemies. Next up, we got the X ability, and this one is called Tornado. Very self-explanatory. You just spawn in a tornado where you're standing, and it flings your enemies up into the sky and does a decent amount of damage to them. The M1 ability of this sword does an average of 1,600 damage. The Z ability does 2,800, and the X ability does 2,900. Overall, a pretty solid sword for the price. Moving on, we got the Iron Mace, which you can buy for the exact same NPC as the previous one, but this one costs 25,000 belly. You can upgrade this sword to grade 2 for 10 leather straps and 10 angel wings. It increases the sword's damage by 30%. First ability of this sword is called Mace Smash. For this one, you smash your mace into the floor and deals damage to everything in a straight line in front of it. Next ability is the X ability, and this one is called Killer Combo. You spin around the mace and you deal a decent amount of damage to everything around you, and then you slash forward just like the first ability. This sword does 1,900 damage for its M1 ability, and the Z ability does 3,000, and the X ability does 3,600. Keep in mind, the damage I'm reading out for this video is only for players that are max level and max mastery. So if you're low level, you're not going to be doing this much damage with the sword. Next up, we got the Shark Saw, and for this one, you actually get it in a pretty unique way. You need to head over to Middletown on the first sea, and the Saw boss spawns in every 1 hour and 15 minutes. Once you kill him, you have a chance of getting the sword dropped to you, but you have to do at least 10% damage to him. This sword does have a grade 2, which you can upgrade to for 12 leather straps, and increases the sword's damage by 25%. First up, we got the Z ability, and this one is called Consecutive Slashes, and you basically just shoot forward a bunch of air slashes. Moving on, we got the X ability, and this one is called Execution. And for this one, you basically just start spinning around with your sword, and it deals a decent amount of damage to everything you hit. Moving on, we got the Triple Katana. This sword costs a total of 60,000 belly, and you can upgrade it to grade 2 for 15 metal scraps and 15 leather. The first ability of this sword is called Air Slashes Barrage, and for this one, you just shoot out a butt ton of air slashes, and they all do a decent amount of damage. Moving on, we got the X ability, and this one is called Violent Rush. It's similar to one of the katana's abilities, but for this one, you dash forward and deal 3 strikes of damage to your enemy. Overall, a pretty solid sword for the price. Moving on, we got the Dual-Headed Blade. This sword costs a total of 400,000 belly, and you can buy it from the Master Swords dealer who's located at the 4th island in Skylands. You can upgrade the sword to grade 2 with 12 fishtails and 10 metal scraps, and increases the sword's damage by 25%. The first ability of this sword is called Assassinate, and for this one, you lock your enemy in place and you just dash forward with them, and you deal a decent amount of damage to them. Next is the X ability, and this one is called Raging Wind, and you shoot out 3 tornadoes, and it looks very cool. I really love the effects of this sword. Moving on, we got the Pipe. That's literally what it's called. I don't even know if you can consider this a sword, but it does cost 100,000 belly to buy, and you buy it from the sword dealer of the East, who's located at the frozen village at the first sea. You can upgrade the sword to grade 2 for 12 fishtails and 10 metal scraps. The first ability of this sword is called Pipe Ignition. You just ignite the pipe on fire and you hit your enemy with it. It's similar to the Bomb Fruit's X ability. Next ability is called Dragon Blast, and for this one, you just spawn in a butt ton of fire around wherever you hit your enemy, and it also causes burn damage, similar to the Flame Fruit's V ability. Moving on, we got the Soul Cave. You can buy this sword from the Living Skeleton NPC for 750,000 belly. This NPC is actually kind of hidden, so you have to head over to the Magma Village on the first sea, and you have to access it through this special area here. It's basically an intangible wall, but you can just walk straight through. You can upgrade this sword to grade 2 for 5 radioactive materials and 20 leather, and increases the sword's damage by 20%. First ability of this sword is called Soul Beam, and for this one, you just shoot out a Soul Beam that freezes your enemy for 1.5 seconds, and they literally can't do anything in that time. Next up, we got the X ability, and this one is called Soul Slashes, and for this one, you just shoot out a butt ton of air slashes, and they deal a decent amount of damage to your enemy. Moving on, we got the Trident, and this is one of the cooler swords on this list. The way you get it is by defeating the Fishman Lord, who's located at Underwater City on the first sea. You can upgrade this sword to grade 2 for 20 metal scraps and 12 magma rocks, and increases the sword's damage by 25%. The Z ability is called Trident Throw, and for this one you basically just throw your trident straight forward, and if you don't hit an enemy, then you basically just become Spider-Man and you dash over to where your trident was thrown. But if you do hit an enemy, then it actually pulls them towards you. Next up we got the Water Pulse ability, and for this one you basically just do damage to everything that's located around you, but it's not much damage because it covers a huge area. Moving on, we got the Warden Sword. You can get this by defeating the Chief Warden NPC located at the prison. You can upgrade this sword to grade 2 for 12 magma rocks and 10 leather straps, and increases the sword's overall damage by 25%. The first ability of this sword is called Multi-Target Slash, and for this one you basically just deal damage to everything around you in a very small radius, and you actually knock them back as well. Moving on, we got the X ability, and this one is called Tornado Slash, and it does exactly what it sounds like. You literally just shoot out a tornado from your sword. Not sure how that works, but let's head over to the next sword. This one is called Bicento, and it's the first legendary sword on this list. It costs a total of 1 million belly, and you can get it from the Master Swords dealer. The first ability of this sword is called Windbreaker, and for this one you just shoot out a huge gust of wind right in front of you, and this wind actually does a scary amount of damage. Next is the X ability, and this one is called Quake Spear, and it's similar to the Water Pulse ability of the Trident. It just does a small amount of damage to everything around it and knocks them all back. Moving on, we got the Pole V1. You can get this sword by defeating the Thunder God NPC aka Enel, who's located at Upper Skylands in the first sea. This sword does have a grade 2 which you can upgrade to for 10 radioactive rocks, 20 metal scraps, and 10 angel wings. It increases the sword's damage by 25%. The first ability of this fruit is called Explosive Cloud, and you basically just create an explosion wherever your cursor is. Then we got the X ability, and this one is called Lightning Rain, and you just shoot down 3 lightning bullets that deal a decent amount of damage to where your cursor is. Moving on, we got a very overpowered sword. This is literally the strongest sword in the whole game, but that's only fits in its V2 version. The V1 version is alright, but it isn't as good as the V2. The sword does have a grade 2 which you can upgrade to for 5 radioactive rocks and 10 metal scraps, as well as 10 magma ore, and increases the sword's overall damage by 15%. The first ability of this sword is called Deadly Rush, and for this one you just dash straight forward into your enemy, dealing damage to everything in your path. Next up is the X ability, and this one is called Triple Slash, and for this one you just shoot out a butt ton of slashes in one area, and they all deal a decent amount of damage. Moving on to swords in the second sea, the first one we got here is the Dragon Trident, and you get this by defeating the Tidekeeper NPC. You can upgrade the sword to grade 2, which requires 10 dragon scales and 10 leather straps, and increases the sword's damage by 8%. The first ability of this sword is called Sea Dragon Fury, and for this one you shoot out a huge water projectile that deals a decent amount of damage and knockback to anything it hits. Next we got the X ability, and this one is called Water Shadow Dragon. You literally spawn in a dragon for this one, and the effects are very cool. Basically just does damage to everything around it, as well as a stun effect. Next up we got the Gravity King, and you can get this by defeating the Vegeta NPC located at the green zone. You can upgrade the sword to grade 2 for 3 meteorites and 10 metal scraps. It increases the sword's damage by 13%. The first ability is called Dimensional Grasp. You basically do damage to everything where your cursor is. Next one is called Lunar Blitz, and for this one you basically use gravity to fling your target into the sky and deal constant damage to them, and then it slams them back into the floor. Very cool ability. Next up we got the Jide Sword, and you can get this by defeating the Smoke Admiral, who's located at the Hot and Cold Island on the hot side. You can upgrade the sword to grade 2 for 10 Vampire Fangs and 15 metal scraps, and increases the sword's damage by 18%. The first ability of this sword is called Smoke Leopard. Pretty interesting name. You basically just launch a blast of smoke in the direction where your cursor is aiming. Next ability is called Smoke Apparition, and for this one you basically just teleport to where your cursor is located, releasing a small amount of smoke that deals damage to everything around it. And this is a very cool ability. I'm glad they updated it, and overall it just makes this sword a lot better. Moving on, we got the Long Sword, and this is a rare sword you can get by defeating the Diamond Boss, who's located at the Kingdom of Rose. This sword does have a grade 2 which you can upgrade to for 10 radioactive rocks and 10 metal scraps. The first ability of this sword is called Annihilate. For this one you dash forward into your enemy and you hit them with a butt ton of slashes. Next up is the X ability, and this is actually similar to one of the Dark Steps ability. It basically shows you a trajectory of where you can launch yourself, and once you do it, it's going to create a grassy area where you land, and it's going to deal a decent amount of damage, and it's going to deal even more if they're standing on it. Next up we got the first legendary sword of the second sea, and this is called Coco. You can get it by defeating the Order Raid boss. This sword does have a grade 2 which you can upgrade to for 10 Vampire Fangs and 15 metal scraps. The first ability of this sword is called Injection Stab, and you dash straight forward, dealing a decent amount of damage to your enemy. Next ability is called Injection Shot, and for this one, instead of dashing forward, you just shoot forward a very cool looking electric projectile, and it deals a lot of damage. Moving on, we got the Midnight Blade, and this is a very cool looking sword, and the way you get it is actually kind of special. And the second sea, there's an area called the Cursed Ship, and when you kill NPCs here, you get a currency called Ectoplasm, and that's how you get the Midnight Blade. You can buy from an NPC called L Admin for 100 Ectoplasm, and you can upgrade this sword to grade 2 for 40 Ectoplasm Ectoplasm as well as 15 metal scraps, and increases the sword's damage by 13%. Next up we got the Z ability, and this one is called Portal Opening, and it's literally just like the Z ability of the portal fruit. It flings your enemy into a butt ton of portal and slams them back into the ground. Next up we got the X ability, and this one is called Crescent Dash, and you basically just grab your enemy, dash forward, and deal a decent amount of damage to them. Next up we got the Pole V2, and you can buy this from the Thunder God NPC for 5,000 fragments, and you also need to do a long and tedious quest, and there's also a few requirements. And you can actually also upgrade the sword to grade 2 for 15 fishtails, 10 mystic droplets, and 12 metal scraps. It increases the sword's damage by 8%. The first ability of this sword is called Hand of God, and you basically just shoot forward 3 lightning beams that deal a lot of damage to your enemy. Next up we got Electrical Prison, and for this one you basically just entrap your opponent in a small electrical prison. It's basically like an electrical spear, and it does a lot of damage. Moving on, we got the Rengoku sword, which is named after everybody's favorite Demon Slayer character. And the way you get this is actually pretty cool. You have to defeat the Awakened Ice Admiral, and you have a chance of getting dropped the hidden key. Once you do that, you have to walk over here behind the staircase and open the secret chest. Once you do that, you can get the sword. The sword does have a grade 2, which you can upgrade to for 8 vampire fangs, 20 magma rocks, and 15 metal scraps. It increases the sword's damage by 8%. The first ability of this sword is called Demon Slayer, and for this one you dash forward and deal a butt ton of slashes and knock your enemy far back. Next is the X ability, and this one is called Burning Slash. And it actually has 2 versions, the tap version and the hold version. If you hold it down, it does a lot more damage and the abilities look way cooler. But if you just tap it, then it's a pretty small slash, but they're both still pretty decent. Moving on, we got the Sadi sword, and this one costs 2 million belly, and you can get it from the legendary sword dealer. This sword does have a grade 2, which you can upgrade to for 8 mystic droplets and 10 leather scraps, and increases the sword's damage by 12%. The first ability of the sword is called Swords Dance, and you dash forward into your enemy, lock them in place, and deal a butt ton of damage to them. Next is the X ability, and this is called True Air Slash, and for this one you shoot a humongous air slash that deals damage to everything in its path. Moving on, we got the Shisui sword. This one costs a total of 2 million belly, and you can buy it from the exact same NPC, the legendary sword dealer. And the upgrade to grade 2 is the exact same, but it increases the damage by 10% for this sword. The first ability is called True Quiet Rush, and for this one you dash straight forward, and I guess it's just an enhanced version of the katana's basic ability. Next is the X ability, and this one is called Focus Shot, and for this one you just shoot a very fast purple projectile that deals a lot of damage to anything it hits, but its hitbox is pretty small, so make sure you focus on aiming. Next up we got the Wando sword, and guess what, you buy it from the exact same NPC as the previous swords, and the upgrade to grade 2 is exactly the same, but for this one you can increase the overall damage by 12%. The first ability of this sword is called Continuous Slash. You lock your opponent in place and deal a butt ton of slashes to them. Next up we got the X ability, and this one is called Dragon Gust. You just shoot forward a huge white projectile, you dash into your enemy, and you deal a decent amount of damage to them. Alright, next up we got the final sword of the second sea, and this is the first mythical sword on this list, and it's called the True Triple Katana, and it is literally one of the hardest swords to get in the whole game, and it costs a total of 2 million belly. That's not it. There's also a butt ton of requirements. You remember the previous 3 swords I mentioned before this? Well, you need all of them to get this. So in total, that's 6 million belly just to get this. And that's not even considering the mastery and the amount of time it's going to take you. You can upgrade this sword to grade 2 for 5 dragon scales, 20 mystic droplets, and 50 leather. And it's going to increase the sword's damage by 13%. The first ability is called Wolf Fang Rush. And for this one, you dash straight forward and slash your enemy, sending them flying. Next ability is called Dragon Hurricane. And for this one, you shoot out a huge projectile that actually turns into a tornado, dealing a lot of damage to your enemy. And this is literally the best sword on this list by far, no questions asked. Finally, we're moving on to the third sea. The first swords you get here are the Twin Hooks, and you get this by defeating a boss called Captain Elephant, who's located at the Floating Turtle. You can upgrade this sword to grade 2 for 10 fish tails, 8 vampire fangs, and 20 leather straps, and increases the sword's damage by 8%. The first ability of this sword is called Sky Cyclone, and for this one you just shoot out a tornado. Pretty interesting, but it doesn't do a lot of damage. Next ability is called Prehistoric Foot, and for this one you basically just grab your enemy, dash into them, and deal a decent amount of damage, similar to one of the Mammoth Fruit's abilities. Moving on, we got the Buddy Sword, and you get this by defeating the K-Queen boss, probably one of the hardest bosses in the whole game. And you can upgrade the sword for grade 2 with 8 conjured coca, 5 mystic droplets, and 25 leather straps. The first ability of this sword is called Heat Slash. You basically just shoot a fire slash that burns your enemy if it hits them. Next up we got the Lightning Wave, and for this one you shoot out a huge purple beam that does a lot of damage to whatever it hits. Next sword we got here is the Cavender Sword, and you get this by defeating the beautiful pirate who's located at the Floating Turtle. You can upgrade the sword to grade 2 for 6 dragon scales and 20 leather straps, and it increases the sword's damage by 8%. The first ability of this sword is called Piercing Dash. You just dash straight forward in a line and deal damage to everything in your path. Next is the X ability, and this one is called Scattering Gust, and for this one you shoot out a huge projectile and it does a medium amount of damage to your enemy. Moving on, we got the Dark Dagger, and this is a very interesting sword, and the way you get it is by defeating the Rip Indra raid boss, which has a 5% chance to drop it. So this is also an extremely rare sword, and I doubt you're getting this one anytime soon. You can upgrade the sword to grade 2 for 1 dark fragment, 8 dragon scales, and 10 metal scraps. scraps and increases the sword's damage by 8%. The first ability of this sword is called Proficient Impale. You dash straight forward and you basically just stab your opponent. It does a decent amount of damage and also breaks observation. The X ability is called Shaving Slash. For this one, you teleport your enemy, lock them in place, and deal a numerous amount of slashes to them. Next up, we got the Fox Lamp, which is a sword that was added to the game pretty recently. And the way you get it is by heading over to a Kitsune shrine. And you need to pay 15 Azure Ambers, and it's not even guaranteed. You're basically rolling for it. You can upgrade this sword to grade 2 for 10 Azure Embers, 15 metal scraps, and 10 magma ore. And increases the sword's damage by a measly 7%. And this sword is actually styled after the Kitsune fruit, so its abilities are pretty similar to that. The Z ability is called Scorching Aura. And for this one, you grab your enemy and you dash them around a bunch of times and deal a lot of damage to them. The X ability is called Infernal Firestorm. And for this one, you dash into your enemy and just pulverize them with a bunch of Kitsune flame. And this one does a lot of damage. Next up, we got the Shark Anchor Sword. And this was added to the game in Update 20. And you get this by using the Monster Magnet to defeat the Anchor Terror Shark. You can upgrade this sword to grade 2 for 10 Fishtails, 5 Mystic Droplets, and 50 metal scraps. And increases the sword's damage by 7%. The first ability of this sword is called Typhoon Toss. This one, you grab your enemy, swing them around like a typhoon, and you send them flying into the distance and deal even more damage to them. The X ability is called Armor Breaker. And for this one, you basically dash into your enemy and just slam them into the floor with the sword. And it deals a decent amount of damage. And this actually deals more damage to transform things like sea beasts, ships, terror sharks, people that use the Buddha, Mammoth, or even T-Rex transformation. And also does more damage than the Factory Raid. Next ability is called Spiky Trident, and you get this by defeating the Cake Prince or the Dough King. You can upgrade the sword to grade 2 for 8 Conjured Coca, 5 Mystic Droplets, and 25 metal scraps. It increases the sword's damage by 7%. The first ability is called Dough Hurricane, and for this one, you basically grab your enemy and dash forward, leaving a bunch of dough behind you. Next is the X ability, and this one is called Flying Trident Pull. You basically just pull the enemy towards you and do a small amount of damage to them. And if you're using this ability, I just recommend using it for combos, because by itself, it's pretty useless. Next sword we got here is called Tushita, and you get this by defeating the Logma boss, and also doing a long and tedious quest, which you can search up if you want to do it. To upgrade this sword to grade 2, you need 20 Vampire Fangs and 6 Leather Scraps, and increases the sword's damage by 8%. The first ability of this sword is called Heavenly Lunge, and for this one, you just stab your enemy a butt ton of times and lock them in place so they cannot move. Next is called Celestial Ravager, and for this one, you dash into your enemy, sending them flying, and then you hit them twice with the sword, and you can literally see the marking on the floor. Next sword we got here is the Yama sword, and you can get this through the Secret Temple quest, and it is a very long quest. And just like the previous one, you can search it up if you want to do it. You can upgrade this sword to grade 2 for 20 Vampire Fangs, 6 Leather Straps, and increases the sword's damage by 8%. The first ability of this sword is called Hellish Slash, and for this one, you dash into your enemy, sending them flying into the distance and dealing a medium amount of damage to them. Next is the X ability, and this is called Infernal Hurricane. And for this one, you dash into your enemy, hold them in place, and you basically just hit them a butt ton of times. Next up, we got the Cursed Dual Katana, and the way you get this is by merging the previous 2 swords I mentioned, and for that, you need to have a 350 mastery on both swords, the Yama and Tushita, and you need to complete the Cursed Dual Katana puzzle. You also have a butt ton of requirements. To upgrade this sword to grade 2, you need 10 Demonic Wisps, 10 Vampire Fangs, and 60 Metal Scraps, and increases the sword's damage by 7%. The Z ability of this sword is called Revolting Ravager, and for this one, you shoot out a huge projectile that does a lot of damage to the enemy and also stuns them. The X ability is called Slayer of Goliath, and this one is also a projectile, but you charge this one up, so it does a lot more damage than the previous one. Moving on, we got the Halo Scythe, and this sword is pretty special. Not only is it mythical, but you get it by defeating the Soul Reaper boss, and to spawn that guy in, you need to do a long tedious quest, so you already know this sword is overpowered. To upgrade this sword to grade 2 is very tedious. You need 8 Demonic Wisps and 800 bones, which you get by farming at the Haunted Castle at the 3rd sea, and you also need 25 Metal Scraps, all to increase your sword's damage by 8%. Not worth the grind in my opinion, but if you want to do it, then you can go ahead. The first ability is called Death Cyclone, and for this one, you just shoot out a huge tornado from your sword, and it deals a decent amount of damage to your enemies. Next is the X ability, and this one is called Soul Execution. For this one, you can control your cursor, flying towards your enemy, grabbing them, and dealing a lot of damage to them. The next 2 swords I got here are very exclusive. Normal players cannot get them. The first one is the Dark Blade, which I guess you can get if you pay Robux, but it is a very overpowered sword. You can upgrade the Dark Blade to grade 2 for 1 Dark Fragment, 15 Dragon Scales, and 10 Magma Ore, all to increase the damage by 8%. The first ability of the Dark Blade is called 1000 Slices, and this one, you lock your opponent in place and just slash them a butt ton of times. You can literally see how many slashes there are. There is a huge amount of them. Next is the X ability, and this is called Dark Air Slash, and it does exactly what it sounds like. You just shoot out a huge massive slash that is almost impossible to dodge because of how fast it is. You can also charge up the slash to do more damage. And you might be wondering, what is more overpowered than the Dark Blade? Well, the next sword I got here is the Triple Dark Blade, and this sword, the only way you can get it is if an admin gives it to you, because this sword is literally exclusively for them. You can upgrade the sword to grade 2 for 25 Dark Fragments and 99 Dragon Scales and 99 Magma Ore, all to increase the damage by 5%. The first ability is called 1000 Slices, just like the previous sword. It works exactly the same as well. But the X ability is called Dark Air Slash, and this does have a small difference from the normal Dark Blade. Well, instead of shooting out one Dark Slash, you shoot out 3 whole Dark Slashes. Oh my god, this sword is literally so overpowered. And that's it.